Hola, buenos días, buenas noches, o buenas tardes, depending on what time of day you're watching this. I'm so sorry I can't be there in Mexico at AAPLAC this year, but I'm really very grateful that I'm able to join you virtually. I'm going to be sharing with you some research I've been doing for the past 8 months, and just one section of it on how we are coming to understand study abroad and how we are really demarcating what it means to work in study abroad from a higher education perspective. So for the past 8 months or so, I've been looking at how academic journals frame study abroad. I'm going to talk to you about 2 theoretical concepts just to sort of ground the work a little bit. And the first one is social practice theory. So while I won't go into the depth of this theory, social practice theory does talk about or explore the ways in which the way we do work helps to create boundaries and expectations for our work, and also reflect and build upon our identities. And that it's really a collaborative kind of thing, right? So the discourse about how we talk about our work as well as the way we do our work helps to create these boundaries. And also framing theory. So what framing theory talks about is that the language and the concepts that we refer to and build upon when we discuss any particular phenomena help to define what's part of that phenomena and what's left out of that phenomena. So these 2 theories were applied to study abroad in the study. I conducted a content analysis of 2 publications, and I included Frontiers and the NAFSA Research Symposium series because the organizations that publish these 2 publications are the largest organizations that focus on study abroad in the United States and are therefore very influential in what we do. I created a sampling frame for the years 2017 to 2021. Now, these 5 years are particularly interesting because we have pre-pandemic years, pandemic years, and almost post-pandemic, but not quite. The pandemic obviously had a serious impact on study abroad. Students were called home. A lot of people who work in study abroad and on the administrative sides lost their jobs. And we had to really think about, can we continue doing the work that we're doing without traveling? So even though some of those digital study abroad at home and COIL projects had been started, this really sort of opened up the gates to really continue to work in that area, given the fact that we couldn't travel anymore. I analyzed 71 articles, 50 of which was from Frontiers and 21 of which were published in the NAFSA Research Symposium. I was looking at 4 research questions, and the first one was, to what extent do what we're publishing in these journals reflect the 4 student outcomes that were identified by Twombly et al. In 2012. And those 4 outcomes are intercultural competence, a concept I feel like most of you are probably familiar with, and that has cognitive, psychosocial, and interpersonal elements that look at intercultural competence on a sort of continuum, right? So from ethnocentric to ethno-relative. Sometimes we look at intercultural competence in terms of a pyramid, but regardless of our theoretical modeling of intercultural competence, what we're really talking about is developing those attitudes and skills that will help us to be able to communicate with people from different cultures, not from an other point of view, but being able to understand one is not better than another, and it's not us and them. The second outcome was other educational and developmental outcomes, and these include things like identity, intellectual development, academic interest, maturity, and independence. And then also general academic outcomes. Now, these ones are things that administrators are probably a little bit more interested in than those study abroad faculty. So things like grades, graduation rate, time to degree, retention. And then language is also in there because language has been so intertwined with study abroad historically. And then finally, impact on careers. And this particular outcome really reflects the changes in terms of commerce and business, as well as political, internationalization and globalization, right? Most of us are going to work with, most of our students are going to work with people from other cultures, either because we're in transnational corporations or organizations, or because of so many people moving into different areas and emigrating. We might be working with people who are culturally different from us. And so our ability to consider and work with differing attitudes and cultures is really important. So when I looked at the articles, what I found was that 60% of the articles mentioned intercultural competence, right? So intercultural competence, study abroad was framed with intercultural competence having a sort of dominant position in that discussion. Second was developmental outcomes. A third was the career outcomes, and fourth was academic. But even at the academic outcomes, 29% of the articles still mentioned those. So what are the implications of these findings? First, the fact that these outcomes are so dominant in the articles really identifies the outcomes as foundational knowledge for anyone who's really working in study abroad. So we should, as we're developing programs, it would probably be worthwhile to think about in which way our study abroad programs are connecting to these outcomes. Secondly, they're learning-centered. Right? So they're not student-centered, they're learning-centered. So we're really focusing on the pedagogical and educational intent of study abroad. And then finally, intercultural competence specifically, there's been a lot of measurements developed, or I shouldn't say a lot, there's been several measurements developed which have been validated in the research to help us determine if we're meeting these intercultural competence goals as well as the others. And this provides a frame for program assessment. As you know, we're not all happy about it, but assessment has been sweeping the higher education sector for more than a decade now. And so we're able to say, yes, we're spending money and we're doing these activities, but here are some outcomes that we can measure against. In addition, internationalization of campus has been a trend, again, for over a decade. And study abroad has been identified as one of the top strategies to internationalize campuses. So being able to assess that and to answer to that institutional goal is very helpful. I was also interested in what else are we talking about when we're talking about study abroad? And I used a couple of different indicators or variables to consider this. So I used reference subject index. As I'm sure many of you know, when your articles are published, right, they're indexed in a couple of different ways. Reference subject is one of those. Of the list, this is the list of the most commonly used or cited or incidents of reference subjects. So which frames are these related to or reflecting? I found it really interesting that the word foreign students and foreign study had the highest incidence in the reference subject index. And over global, you'll see global is much lower here. And then if we look, so we have foreign students, foreign study, then we have countries, national locations, very much a boundary-based kind of language. Then we move on to pedagogy and to students, so that's sort of student focus. And then, some other sort of related comments. So interesting in the subject index area. I also looked at keywords. So when we looked at keywords, we see education abroad, study abroad at the top of the list, pedagogy, then theory and disciplinary knowledge, and internationalization, But interestingly, there's a big drop after education abroad and study abroad from 25 to 15. So what are the frames that we're looking at? Well, the word foreign is not included here. These are all from the same articles. So when we're using keywords, we've taken the word foreign out, but abroad is the dominant word here. And then we have keywords that are related to teaching and theory. So those are the frames in which, when we look at keywords, we're understanding the published articles. Oh, sorry, and theory and international students. I also looked at the article abstracts, and I did a thematic analysis of the abstracts, and then, of course, put some numbers to it so I would be able to do something sort of comparative. So theory was the highest in terms of incidence. Abstract theme, enrollment, student engagement, globalization. So our frames again are theory, which kind of makes sense. The abstracts are written by the authors. The authors, of course, are motivated not only by their interest in study abroad, but on promotion, tenure, publishing, that research section of what we're expected to do. And abroad administration is the next section, like enrollment. How are we going to deal with student engagement, right? And other kinds of issues. So again, we need that buy-in from administration. We need the framework, the support systems that help us. We have globalization and internationalization, of course, right? So that as the authors, we're seeing our work we're contextualizing our work in these ways. And then government policy and immigration. And I think this one is specifically related to the time period. You may remember that immigration became an even hotter button issue here in the United States in 2016 and moving forward. And so there was a lot of discussion about that. The last two are religion, faith, and spirituality. I think that was mostly because there was a special issue relating spirituality and religion and faith to study abroad. And then, of course, we see digital tech and online, which I think reflects not only our need to think about study abroad during the pandemic from a different perspective or from a how are we going to get there perspective, but also the history of increasing use of technology and online pedagogies, not only in study abroad, but in higher education more broadly. So what methods were employed, right? So methods really do talk about a particular perspective that we take when we're doing research and building knowledge. As we look here, case study was the most used method in the study, followed by survey, mixed methods, and interviews. And so the case study approach really focuses on unique, novel, and situated perspectives. Right, so that's how we're framing study abroad, which in many ways really does align with the underlying concepts of intercultural competence. The second one is survey, which, of course, is our need to quantify, to understand things in sort of the bigger picture. And I'm sort of skipping mixed methods here, but, mixed methods, bringing multiple perspectives together, and then interviews, which provide that depth of understanding and meaning making that we really have difficulty getting to from the other methods. So there's that frame of understanding, that uniqueness, the novelty, and the depth of meaning making, in addition to the ability to quantify what we're doing. Another thing I was really, really very interested in is how are we building this knowledge? Like, what's the base that we say, oh, this is what study abroad means, and now we're going to build from that. To do this, I took all of the references from the 71 articles, and I analyzed those in terms of dispersion and concentration. So when we look at the citation of articles, only one article was cited 12 times, but over 22 articles was cited only one time. Were cited only one time. 11 of the most cited articles comprised a little bit over 3% of all the sample references, and those were published by 6 organizations. And I'm using the word organization here and not journals because some of them were reports. Close to 80% of all of the sources were only cited one time. So we see this indicating a wide dispersion of sources. Here's our list of top reference books by titles. So these are full books that were referenced and not just chapters. These author names, these scholars, are names that we see again and again, over and over in the analysis. I also looked at recency of publication. So close to 85% of all the sources used or cited in the 71 articles were published between 2000 and 2018. And we see this, this really increasing citation of things that were published at that time. So we see a lot of interest and growth. Here are the top reference journals. Again, these are top reference in the sources of the 71 articles. 4 journals comprise 25% of all of the journals that are cited, right? So those top 4, that's 25% of everything, right? So what does that indicate? That indicates that those are our specialized journals that we're going to. 18 of the articles account for 40%. We have that really specialized positioning. So when I look at the references, I see, if I plot them along, that they take on this economic term called the long tail or long tail dispersion, right? So it has a head. These ones are cited more often, and then a long tail that are cited very infrequently. Why is this interesting? Well, a long tail distribution will accommodate a broader range of perspectives. And we can, over here in this area, right, of the ones that are not cited very often, we can expect to find unexpected contributions. In an article that looked at this from the economic perspective, they said that previously uneconomic niche markets should increase overall demand. So what does that mean? That means that by these articles here still being cited, right, it shows a greater breadth of interest in publishing about study abroad. So that greater breadth helps all of us who work in study abroad move forward. The head here, these are the ones that are cited most often. That confers authority, right? So that provides the depth of theory and knowledge building and knowledge production for study abroad. Of course, in the long tail, every new citation is impacted by prior citation. So if you were cited once, you're more likely to be cited again, or more concisely, if your article is part of this head, you're more likely to be cited again. So the citation legitimizes theory through the recursive practices of social practice theory. So what that says is our practice of citing, especially in the head here, it legitimizes the contributions of these articles. Where else might I go with some of this research? You might be asking yourself. I'm working on some ideas related to the typology of study abroad faculty, pre-trip pedagogy, given sort of what we have found so far, and sort of the alternative routes to developing intercultural competence related to digital pedagogies and the inability to travel. And a bigger idea I didn't really get to talk about too much today is the role of academic disciplines in understanding what's going on with study abroad and interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. Study abroad doesn't have a disciplinary home, and there are certain impacts, benefits, and disadvantages to that. So thank you so much for listening to my research today, to my talk, and I look forward to speaking to you sometime soon.